Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome everyone to the second in our series of webinars to help Canadian manufacturers to understand the opportunities and some of the challenges in pivoting or entering defense and dual-use manufacturing. To get things started, first of all, I'm Stuart Kramer, the Chief Program Officer at Next Generation Manufacturing Canada. And it is my great pleasure to introduce our Chief Executive Officer, Jason Myers, to get things started today. Jay?
Thanks very much, Stuart, and welcome everybody to this webinar. It's an important subject, of course, on the brink of Canada's new defense procurement strategy that should be announced momentarily. Here, I think this series of webinars really is designed to really help companies not only navigate their way through defense procurement, but to look at where the opportunities are, really understand, as Stuart says, where the obstacles are, and get prepared for if that is an area of interest for manufacturers or for technology companies as well. Before we begin, though, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on lands that have been long inhabited by Indigenous peoples. We want to recognize the enduring presence and contributions of First Nations and Inuit, Métis people across all the lands and waters that we know now as Canada. As this comme s'agit d'une rencontre virtuelle à l'échelle nationale, nous invitons chacun et chacune à réfléchir aux territoires autochtones depuis lesquels vous participez aujourd'hui. I want to, first of all, acknowledge some of the amazing strengths that we have at NGen in the defense field. First of all, Stuart, our Chief Program Officer here. I think, Stuart, you might be the only Canadian who has actually worked on preliminary designs for fifth-generation fighter aircraft in Canada. A long career with Northrop, worked on designs for five fighter aircraft there, but also experience as president of LAI Aerospace and as CEO of Vertex here in Canada. So just an example of some of the depth of experience that we have. As we said too, this series of webinars is really about how we can help manufacturers and technology companies prepare to enter the defense market in Canada, understanding the opportunities, but also some of the obstacles that stand in the way, some of the requirements that companies have. Here, it's I think in preparation for this, one lesson I've learned is it's not for the faint of heart. It is a challenging ride here. And of course, one of the major issues is around standards, regulatory compliance, security requirements as well. So that's what we're going to focus on today. I want to welcome our two panelists, Jonathan Clow and Raymond Heroux. Christy McLeck is going to be chairing the panel discussion here a little bit later on. So again, a very, very highly qualified member of NGen's team. But Mary Christine Stevens, MC, is going to lead us off. She's going to MC this next section of the presentation, and I really can't think of anyone better qualified to do that. MC has, again, before joining NGen, a really stellar career working with Rheinmetall in particular on in defense, and where she was a group leader in international trade compliance transportation and Rheinmetall's defense sector here in defense company here in Canada. She's a real expert, and hopefully not an export, but an expert on export controls on security clearances, on ITAR issues, and everything else you want to know about international compliance. I think again, we couldn't have asked for a better speaker to kick things off, given the depth of MC's knowledge here. So over to you, MC, and thank you all again for joining us.
So, thank you, and hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. So we know that entering the defense market, especially around certification, control, I'll wait for, yeah. So around certification, control, and cyber compliance can feel overwhelming. So there are many requirements, and it's not always clear where to begin. So our goal today is simple, not to overload you, but to help you understand the logic and the sequence. So you don't need to do everything at once. You need to do the right things in the right order. I'm really happy, as Jay mentioned, to be part of this discussion today because I come from the private defense sector and I have lived this reality myself. I've seen how confusing the certification landscape can feel and how important it is to step back and focus on what truly applies. So today we'll walk through three pillars: classification, control good and ITAR alignment, and cybersecurity, or cyber compliance, should I say, always with the practical lens of for Canadian company. So this slide, no, the previous, yes. So this slide shows the big picture, and more importantly, the sequence. Defense readiness is not a checklist, it's a progression. Most companies begins with the foundational elements that often already exist: product and data classification, export control awareness, and basic cyber hygiene like access control, data protection, and incident response. At this stage, certification may help, but they're not always mandatory. As companies start working with primes or tier one suppliers, requirements begin to flow downstreams. Control goods often comes into play, along with a clearer expectation around data access, storage, and sharing. Then cross-border exposure is usually the next trigger. ITAR and EAR follow the technology and the data, not the contract. This is also where CMMC becomes relevant and where we see CPCSC emerging in Canada. The final stage is really about earning trust. As companies move closer to primes or take on safety critical work, they begin to face externally validated cybersecurity standard and more customer specific requirements. So the key takeaway is simple. You don't need every stage at once. You need to know where you are, understand what triggers the next step, and move forward intentionally. You will see that some topics sit outside of today's scope because they're tied directly to government contracts, such as the CPSP requirements, C-TPAT and Canada-US Joint Certification Program, internal audits, secure development lifecycle, and so on. But if any of these would be helpful for a future webinar, please let us know, and feel free to use the Q&A section to raise questions or suggest topics for deeper discussion. Next slide. So almost every defense requirement starts with classification of parts, components, software, and technology. If you don't classify correctly, you can't know which certification or controls really apply. Next. So before we start talking about certification or compliance programs, we need to start with classification because it really is the anchor of everything. One of the most important questions for any company entering defense is, where do we sit in the supply chain? Are we producing a final defense-ready system, US munition, not US, but munitionless or dual use that could be used on its own? Or are we supplying components or subpart that gets integrated into a larger product? For many companies, their product remain commercial, even if it ends up inside a defense platform. So that means lower tier suppliers' compliance and certification requirements may look very different from those of a prime contractor. So next slide. So a common misconception is that working with a defense prime means every certification applies and every part becomes controlled. In reality, your obligation depend on what you sell, how it is classified, who your customer is, and what the contract requires. Many suppliers continue exporting commercial non-controlled part even when those parts are later integrated into a controlled defense platform. Integration alone does not automatically make that part controlled. What matters is whether the part itself is specifically captured under the export control list. This is why classification is critical. It allows company to reduce unnecessary permit and it preserves export flexibility. It avoids overcompliance. Your position in the supply chain matters, and classification determines which requirements truly apply. Next, yeah. So, control good program. To understand Canada's control good program, it helps to look briefly at the evolution of ITAR in the United States. Next. So the objective of the CGP is to protect defense-related goods and sensitive technology while preserving Canadian sovereign control framework. It is deliberately aligned with U.S. export control expectation, but it's not governed by U.S. law. So ITAR originates from a U.S. export control legislation dating back from the 1950s. Over time, the level of enforcement and emphasis has evolved, with period of more limited oversight followed by renewed regulatory focus. A major shift occurred in 1999 when the U.S. State Department reasserted strong oversight of ITAR and tightened control over defense-related export and technology transfer. As part of this shift, the United States made it clear to close defense partner that continued exemption and streamlined defense trade would require strong national control and safeguarding regimes. So in response, Canada established the Control Good Program, which came into force in 2001 as a national mechanism to safeguard control defense goods and technology while maintaining Canada's trusted trading status with the United States. So the key difference is that Canada's program applies within Canada only. ITAR does not. It can continue to apply outside the United States, required U.S. authorization, even when activity takes place abroad. Next. CGP registration involves verifying eligibility, appointing designated official, completing security assessment, and implementing a security plan before receiving a 5-year certificate of registration. Once approved, company must maintain access logs, update the program as needed, prepare for audit, and plan timely re-registration to remain compliant. From a strategic standpoint, a company does not need to sign a signed contract, a defense contract, to registered under the control program, but it does need to demonstrate a credible business rationale, a realistic expectation of handling control goods, and that CGP registration aligns with actual and imminent business activities, not speculative plans. So by doing so, often avoids procurement delays and supply chain bottlenecks. While CGP is legally required only when control goods are handled, it is increasingly imposed contractually by prime contractors or even D&D as a risk management and readiness measure. So at this point, it becomes a business decision, and companies that choose not to pursue CGP registration should therefore expect to self-exclude from certain defense opportunity, even where there is no strict legal obligation. Next. So the Control Good Program in Canada regulates access, possession, examination, and transfer of defense-related control goods, ensuring compliance with the Defense Production Act. It also controls the import and export of certain defense-related goods for services, not limited to dual use or a munition list item. Its purpose is to prevent unauthorized individuals from gaining access to these goods or services. But what are control goods? Control goods are Goods, including components and technical data that have military and national security significance, which are controlled domestically by the Government of Canada and defined in the Defense Production Act. It's also goods, including components and technology. For example, you have blueprints or technical specification in paper or electronic format that have strategic significance or national security implication, regardless of where they are manufactured. It's also defense articles that are originating from the US that are controlled under the US munition list, regulated by ITAR. It's also goods, regardless of where they are manufactured, that are manufactured from. So the keyword is from ITAR restricted technical data originating from the US and are regulated or controlled by ITAR. Next. So International Traffic in Arms Regulation, ITAR, and Export Administration Regulation, EAR. What are they? ITAR governs the U.S. defense-related items, services, and technical data listed on the U.S. munition list and follows the technology wherever it goes, meaning that it has global reach. It doesn't stop at the U.S. border. In the Canadian context, ITAR control items generally align with our Category 2 munition list of our Canada's Export Control List, the ECL. EAR applies to U.S. original commercial and dual-use items and technology, which often correspond or are similar in spirit to our Category 1 dual-use under the ECL. It is frequently overlooked because products do not need to be military specific to be subject to control. Next. Once a company is CGP compliant, it generally meets many of the ITAR expectations, especially around secured management and sensitive defense-related item. So, however, that does not mean a Canadian company should automatically seek ITAR compliance. ITAR comes into play when you are handling confirmed ITAR control data and technology or components, not simply because you operate in the defense space. From a Canadian's perspective, it's often strategically important not to make a product ITAR control if you don't have to, because once ITAR applies, it introduces U.S. authority over how that product can be used, transferred, or exported, even when it is developed and manufactured in Canada. Next. So this is where classification really becomes critical and where documentation plays a much bigger role than people expect. Classification on its own is not enough. You need to be able to prove it. That's where documentation comes in. So for a Canadian company, the goal should be to maintain a clearly defined Canadian origin final product. Things like a documented bill of material, signed drawings, a traceable design record are what allows you to demonstrate that your system was independently developed and is Canadian controlled or Canadian origin. So that proof matters because it protects you. So it allows you to defend your classification, preserve Canadian sovereignty, and avoid being pulled into unnecessarily ITAR or export permit requirements. It also gives you flexibility if you later decide to sell into the US defense program. You can at that point intentionally create a separate ITAR specific product version without contaminating your original Canadian product. And trust me when I say that US authority will try to find excuses to convince you that your product may be subjected to US export control, ITAR requirement. Be ready. I often describe the US control as this spider web. So you can be walking along in a forest thinking your product is purely Canadian, you're minding your own business, and then you suddenly brush against one strand. So you didn't mean to enter the web, but once you do, the challenge becomes figuring out how to get out without getting more tangled and how to prove where you actually belong. So in short, documentation isn't just about compliance. It's what gives you control, leverage, and long-term commercial protection. Next. Then cyber certification or cyber compliance. Cybersecurity often feels, or sorry, cyber compliance often feels overwhelming because companies assume they need to implement everything at once. In reality, it's about scoping correctly, understanding your data, your system, and your customer, and then building maturity step by step. Not every requirement applies to every company. The goal is to implement it's not to implement hundreds of control, but to ask yourself what actually applies to us and why. Next. So when we talk about cyber compliance certifications, or the anchor is always the same: classification and data sensitivity. Before looking at framework, a company needs to understand what data they handle, how sensitive it is, and where it resides, because that determines the level of protection required. For most companies entering defense or other sensitive market, the baseline is practical: governance and risk management, access control, data protection, system security, incident response, and third-party risk awareness. It's about applying the right protection based on real exposure. CMMC currently dominates the defense supply chain, and CPCSC is emerging in Canada. I won't go into details today, as you'll hear more from our two specialists on the panel today, and we'll dedicate our March webinar to a deeper practical walkthrough of how this program actually works. Next. I lost the... Are you still sharing?
Sorry, MC, we have our upcoming opportunities after that. Can we circle back to that? If we can move to our panel session. Thank you so much. That actually gave us a tremendous background and a map in terms of where companies can go. What we'd like to do now is go into what happens when companies start to follow that map. So to help us to understand the practical side, we've invited two national experts to join myself and MC for a panel. Raymond Haru is the founder of Hurox Trade Compliance and has spent nearly 4 decades working at the intersection of export controls, customs, and international trade compliance. He's advised multinational corporations, SMEs, and even governments on export control regimes, the Controlled Goods Program, ITAR, and product classification. Jonathan Clow, who goes by his military call sign Troll, and he tells me no one has called him Jonathan in 20 years. Troll is a retired Canadian Air Force Lieutenant Colonel with 37 years of operational and NATO experience. He's led large multinational defense programs, worked directly with NATO and the US DoD innovation units, and now at 123 Cyber, he advises Canadian and US defense adjacent companies on cyber compliance, including CMMC and, as MC mentioned, Canada's emerging cyber certification framework, CPCSC. So both Raymond and Troll combined, I'm sure, have seen hundreds of companies move into defense and regulated supply chains. Our goal is to tap into that lived experience today. And of course, MC from our team is wearing her former SME hat as well to help us understand how she personally navigated these systems. So my first question today is for Raymond. Raymond, where do you see most often SMEs triggering compliance requirements without maybe even realizing that they have?
Thank you, Christy. That's actually a very, very common occurrence among SMEs. A lot of SMEs find us and they start telling us what they've done. And we say, no, you shouldn't have done that. Maybe it's too late. Let's go back. I think there's a misunderstanding, initially anyway, between, I'm doing something under a MIL standard, a military standard, so it must be controlled. No, it's not. The difference between controlled and export control, they are two different things, and they mean different things. We're getting tripped up by the word dual use. Very few people understand or get that concept until they're in the thick of things. So assuming that the product is export controlled or subject to the controlled goods program, before doing the research, as Marie-Christine mentioned, the classification is absolutely key. If you don't know that it's listed in the export control list, don't make an assumption that it is. Or in the DPA, which lists the goods that are subject to the controlled goods program. And don't ship non-US military goods to the US until you fully understand what that means. US regulation is extraterritorial. It applies outside of the US for anything that has come from the US or been invented in the US or is carried by a US person. You need to know that. The reverse is also true. SMEs setting up a compliance program that they don't really need to, but I think that gives you a quick idea of some of the things that might trip up SMEs or people who don't understand quite what is required.
Okay, thanks so much, Raymond. I'm going to turn it to MC. So taking some of those signals that Raymond described for us, classification, pressure, DPA, data integration, etc., what structurally begins to change as companies move into a more integrated position inside the supply chain?
So before I answer that, let me just quickly level set, because when I first entered the defense world, I remember thinking, okay, who's who in this supply chain? So the lower tier, tier one, prime. So very simply, the prime contractor is the company that actually signed directly with the government and that holds the overall program. Compared to a tier one supplier, contracts directly with the prime and typically will offer or deliver the major subsystem or integrated components. And then you have the lower tier. That's where they are. It's like they provide parts, they provide components, they provide services, but they are very further down the chain. So, and they are most likely supplying the tier one, or it's possible that they do supply the prime, but they're not holding any responsibility within the main contract. So from what I see, there are mainly three things that tend to change. So the first one, I would say that the level of responsibility will increase. So when you're a lower tier supplier, you often focus on delivering a part or service to a spec. As you move up the supply chain, you start like owning more of the picture, not just what you deliver. But now it's designed, it's documented, protected, it's supported over time, things like that. Things like data handling, traceability, and compliance decision that used to sit on the prime starts landing on your desk. Then I would say that requirements will stop being someone else's problem. So at lower tiers, many compliance or security requirements are handled upstreams. But as company becomes more integrated, export controls, control good, ITAR, EAR exposure, and cyber compliance expectations start landing directly on them. So that's often the moment when organization will realize that they need a clearer internal alignment on their product and the responsibility, so that they can respond more confidently to customers' requirement instead of reacting. Then I would say that trust becomes just as important as capability. Expectations are higher and things start moving much faster. So once a company proves that it's trustworthy within the supply chain, the opportunities tend to come much quicker with less notice. Customers assume that you can handle sensitive information, that you meet the requirements, and that you can respond basically under pressure. So at that point, being almost ready isn't enough. So you need to be operationally ready. So that's where having documentation, processes, and internal alignment, a process in place really matters. So yeah, that's it. So the biggest shift, I would say that company, from being a company that execute to one that actually manages the risk.
Mm. So they're managing much more than quality and delivery, but information as well.
Yeah.
And I love that you hit on trust as well. We talked a lot about that in our last session, and that's a great segue into my next question. I want to take us to cybersecurity and talk about how we build trust. So as we're using our normal tools and our normal habits, but we're maybe integrating up the supply chain or taking on this new sector for the first time, how are companies potentially crossing a line before they even realize it? This is for you, Troll. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, so first of all, I'm going to start off by commending everybody who's actually involved in this, not only the organizers, so congratulations to NGen. This is very, very necessary. But also I want to commend everybody that's actually attending, because the biggest problem here is that knowledge is power, right? And people don't know what they don't know. So if you're even thinking about getting into the defense space, the time to start getting educated and get awareness of what you need is now. So kudos, because there's a lot more companies that could have and should have been on here today that maybe aren't. So congratulations to everyone who is. I think MC made some really great points. So, but I'll start with cyber compliance is more than cybersecurity. So cybersecurity is absolutely critical this day and age. I think we're all aware of that. Canada should have learned some lessons when we found microphones in the concrete walls at Nortel when D&D took over that building, but we kind of didn't. And now we see what the results are. So cybersecurity is a very key component of cyber compliance, but cyber compliance is kind of like the regulatory umbrella that sits on top. So it's more of a holistic perspective on governance, risk, and compliance for companies. Stop. What does it mean? Cyber compliance is all about information flows. How does information come into a company? How does it flow through the company? Who needs to see what, where, and when? And how does it depart the company, right? So secure classified information has some very clear lines, but cyber compliance is more about those informations that are below the classification. Like in Canada, that's protected A, B, and C. And in the US, that's controlled unclassified information. All of this data that was freewheeling across the universe before that has now come back to haunt us, we want to stop that. That's really what it's about. MC's point, I think, was fantastic, that it's a completely different universe now when it comes to the relationship between governments, primes, tier ones, and SMEs. And there was assumptions, honestly, about 3 years ago, that if I'm a small or medium enterprise and I get a contract with a very large prime, I will fall under their compliance. No, the compliance actually is a complete, and this is a term everyone should Google, flow down. It's all about flow down. So whoever touches that information, down to the point if you're a small or medium enterprise with an MSP, the MSP needs to be certified as well. So the biggest thing that folks can do now is start scoping. And when I say now means 12 months from now. So when you're thinking about, don't think about today. Today is literally February of 2027, because CPCSC enters stage 2, where level 1s will start being required in April. And I literally got off a meeting with a company about an hour ago that their prime is saying, well, you're CPCSC level 1 compliant, right? Whoa, what? So CPCSC is not emerging. It has emerged. Pandora's box is open. And actually, it's a very, very good program. And I'll leave it there because I think there's some more questions. But I think there's been some great points made. But knowledge is power. Get educated, attend these webinars, and find out what you need to know.
Okay, thank you. So CPCSC has emerged. That's pertinent information for us right now. And as you're advising companies to do that scoping, can you just walk us through? This is going to be a very high level answer with the amount of time we have, but can you just walk us through what good enough would look like for a company that's just starting out on this journey and maybe not yet in the audit or the certification space?
Yeah, and it's kind of a tough question to answer, Christy, because when we say good enough, we normally are thinking about next week or next month, when in reality, because these are holistic sort of enterprise level certifications, this can take a year to get a level 2, right? So you really have to think that far in advance. But what should I be doing today? Okay, you really should be looking at scoping your business. Who are you doing business with? What information is involved? Maybe we recommend honestly to conduct a needs assessment. What do I need? If I'm going to service this contract, do I need security clearances? Do I need reliability status? Do I need controlled goods? Raymond could probably pile on this one too. Think holistically about what you need to do. Good enough right now, I think, is get education, do a needs assessment, think about your enterprise and where you want to be. And honestly, you cannot go wrong getting level 1 certified for CPCSC and CMMC. It's not that big a hill to climb, a month or two to get those certifications. And it starts to inculcate within the culture of the business and the supply chain, how do I need to think about the next 12 months? It starts to get you into that space of, now I'm starting to know what I don't know. That's what I would say would be the key step to be taking here in the next 90 days.
Okay, thank you. And let's turn it back to Raymond, going back to CGP and ITAR. And if we think about these companies that are scoping out the next 90 days or a year, can you tell us what trends you see in terms of companies maybe jumping onto items too early, or wishing that they had taken on something and finding out they've gone too far down the path before they start?
It goes back to what Troll said, knowledge ahead of time. The first thing you need to know is to understand what the requirements will be, not what they are today. So what do you need to do to get there? You need to have a Gantt chart, or you need to have a plan to say, okay, how am I going to get there? So just for the controlled goods program, I can't tell you how many times people have reached out to us and say, okay, I need a classification for my application, and what's ITAR? And they don't even know what ITAR is. My first question to them is, okay, have you put in your police record check requisition first? Because that's what's going to take the longest. So you need to not put the cart ahead of the horses. Have a good plan to start with, and that requires the knowledge ahead of time. If you're going to start exporting outside of the US, you need to but you need to advise Global Affairs ahead of time that you want to use a general export permit instead of individual permits, because you're shipping to a country that will allow it. If you don't do it ahead of time, CBSA will seize your shipment at time of export. You don't want that to happen, or at least you'll get questions. Which leads me to another mistake some people will make, is that they'll get an answer from the CBSA officer about an export, and it won't ring any bells, it won't raise any red flag, and it should. If they're asking you a question, they're ready to pounce. Do you know why they are ready to pounce? You need to know these things. Cybersecurity, waiting till the last minute, is wrong. It's just dead wrong. Just for regular business, you should have a good grip on the cybersecurity of your data, actually, for commercial purposes, never mind military. But it gets 10 times more complex later, and it becomes a requirement. Start thinking about cybersecurity way before, and then grow into it. It's an evolution. And then, like Marie-Christine mentioned, the classification. You have to know how your goods are classified. In Canada, how they're classified under the DPA, the Control Goods Program. Are they U.S. origin? And if they are U.S. origin or made from U.S. origin technology, what is their classification under ITAR or EAR? And one mistake people make often, is that they'll assign an ITAR USML item number or an ECCN to an item that is not U.S. origin and will not go to the U.S. You don't need that. In fact, you cannot. ECCNs and ITAR USML numbers apply only to U.S. origin goods or made from U.S. control technology. And then once in a while, your product also has some nuclear applications. Guess what? There's a totally whole other set of regulation under the CNSC, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, that you must adhere to. You need to know that ahead of time. So all that to say, you need to understand what you're going to need in a few months, in a few weeks, and in a few days, and then go forward. Get a plan first, get the knowledge first.
Okay, thanks, Ramon. So what I'm hearing is it's very complex. There's a lot of situational questions and things to consider, and probably can't stress enough the importance of getting support from people who've gone through this before. So great to have those of you here. Thank you. I want to bring us back to MC for a moment. MC, from your experience leading companies through this in the past, can you give us any hints or tips in terms of how to lay out the project so that we're not overwhelming either the team itself or the business?
Yes, of course. So to tie this back to the first question and moving up the supply chain, I actually see lower tier roles as the real window of opportunity. So that's the ideal moment to start building compliance capability like gradually. So while you're still focused on your core product, so you don't pause your business to become defense ready. Instead, compliance maturity runs. So you use that time to put the right foundation in place. So if that you move into a more integrated position, you're not starting from scratch. So how do you pace this realistically? I would say first you anchor compliance in what you already do. So look at your existing product, contract, and customers. What classification applies today? What exposure do you already have? What cybersecurity or compliance baseline already exists? You're not reinventing your company, so you're increasing it in areas where that may already be partially in existence. Then I would say focus on readiness, not perfection. So your building compliance is about being able to respond credibly when an opportunity appears. It's not about implementing every certification or control upfront. Many companies overwhelm themselves by trying to future-proof everything at once. So that's when I would say that teams, for lack of better words, like burn out and the momentum like will stall. And then I would say layer requirements over time. Start with ownership, clarity. Who is responsible for export control? Who understands classification? Where is sensitive data stored? Then formalize in documentation. Then you add structure. Certification comes often after. So it's the business, that's the business case that will justify everything. And finally, I could say that I will never say that enough. Compliance is not a one-person job. Use your ecosystem. Engineering understand the product. Operations understand the processes. External advisor explain regulations. So an organization like us, NGen, can help connect those pieces all together and connect you with the right expertise. The company that succeed treat compliance as a shared operational function. So it's not a side task that is screaming for attention and sitting in one person's desk. So to say that, like, I would say integrate, don't isolate it. So yeah, that I could say that like you keep, so the strongest company will keep selling, will keep innovating, and they will steadily raise their compliance maturity. They're in parallel. So from the experience that I have in a system that is built on self-assessment, I learned that the only way to make sense of this massive landscape was to step back, anchor myself in the on the fundamentals, and especially classification. We keep talking about this, and you what actually applied. So once that foundation is clear, the rest will become manageable.
Thanks, MC. That's a really interesting sort of, I'm going to call it a micro view right now, and we're talking about compliance, but looking where NGen sits in the manufacturing sector, looking at the operational efficiencies and capabilities of an entire business. As we're moving into this sector, resiliency is becoming so much more important. And I love that you mentioned integrating across the functions and across the organization to make this work. And also touched on business case. So I want to pick up on that. Thinking through for a company as they sequence these decisions and they start to think through the ROI on these decisions. Troll, you mentioned in our prep call that it was really important for companies to do a really deep gap assessment or a needs assessment. Can you walk us through how companies can sequence the smartest way to spend their money first and how to think about the ROI as they move through the process?
Yeah. I think, first of all, though, let's just take a step back. This all sounds very scary, right? And we're using words like complex and challenging, right? And, you can use terms like literally in about 12 months, no compliance will mean no contract with D&D. And the Coast Guard is also rolling under D&D, and it's not completely clear how that's going to work for them. So it is pervasive, the implications of this. But I'm going to flip that around and go, this is a tremendous opportunity. If we look what's going on in the world and what our country is doing, I think it's doing the right things. I think there's a huge opportunity here. Canada needs these companies. They need your company. They need your products. And there's huge opportunity here in Canada and with our European allies that are taking a relook at how they're defending themselves and how they're organizing their countries in collective sort of defense. I think there's tremendous opportunity here. So how do I get in on it? Well, you're doing the first step. We said you're getting some education. The real first thing you should do, if I was to advise clients, and frankly, this is exactly what we say, let's do a needs assessment. I'm not going to try and upsell you to all kinds of crazy things here. Let's do a needs assessment. What does your business look like? What product do you have? How do you handle it? Or do you actually make physical things? Are you a virtual engineering firm, for example, or design or wargaming or simulation? They're different. So let's take a look at that. What are you going to need? Where do you want to go? So the needs assessment, and then you can never go wrong doing the level ones, because it starts to inculcate that culture that MC was talking about, that it really is pervasive and holistic throughout a business, how they operate. And by and large, we've already had clients that when we start to guide them through this process, they find actual business efficiencies because they're updating their own internal processes and how they do things. And I can't show you an Excel spreadsheet, but I guarantee you there's companies that are saving just as much money as they're spending on compliance by these synergies and harmonizations that they're finding. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here as well. And that's, right before chaos, there's huge opportunity. So the chaos is in 12 to 18 months. That's when reality is going to hit and everyone's going to be running to the door. So start your walk now. Get a plan together. Talk to someone who knows what they're talking about. And there's huge opportunity here, and I can't emphasize that enough.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that we can layer on other opportunities as we proceed forward. So thank you so much, Jonathan. Troll. I want to go to Raymond. From your experience, can you just give us an example of companies where they've spent money that was really hard to sort of unwind after the fact, and give us again that sense of risk assessment here before we move forward?
Absolutely. I got my top 5 in that category. And I'll echo Troll. Do a needs assessment. Don't assume, because when you assume, well, the usual term, but when you assume, chances are you might be wrong and you're going to spend money. Number one, not recognizing that data can be controlled, even though the goods that it relates to, data can be controlled even if the goods it relates to are not controlled, which is kind of weird. If the goods are not controlled, why would the data related to? Well, it can be. Modifying an item for military purposes because it's already in use in civil use, and you're modifying it for military purpose, and you keep the same part number, same description, that will cause you trouble that you cannot undo. Think about that. So if you do a needs assessment, you'll realize that. Going forward with designing a whole security process and security plan before really understanding what is required. If you go to the CGP website, there is a template for a security plan, and you can just fill it out. What they don't tell you is that really a security plan is going to be unique to each company. And the cyber protection, the same thing. What is it that you do? You know your product. You know your company best. How best to protect it falling into the wrong hands. That's what it's all about. Shipping a non-US military item to the US. So an item is military in nature. It's not US, not made from US technology, but you send it as a sample to the US or to a university to do studies on. That's it. If it's ITAR, if it is military, it most likely is painted ITAR now. And because it will have been in the US, it's subject to US ITAR law. Extraterritorial. Finally, don't forget the customs aspect. All the military stuff is one thing, but it doesn't change the fact that there are customs borders to be crossed. And there are customs implications to everything you do, as we've found out in the past year. Make sure your contract really shows who's to pay what and who's responsible for what, because you can lose your shirt really easily.
Okay, thank you so much, Raymond. Sorry, did you have another comment? No? Okay, perfect. Thanks. Okay, so I'm seeing questions in the comment boxes, and I don't know that we'll have time to get to those questions today, but I do want to encourage everyone listening, please put your questions in. We will be collecting those. We'll get back to you directly where we can, but we are also designing follow-on programming, and I'll walk through some of that in a moment. And everything that you ask us will inform us in terms of what's really important for you to hear. So please do add whatever comes to mind, and we'll get back to you. For our panelists, though, we're going to go shortly into our follow-on programming, but just before we do that, I want to ask everyone, what is one signal that you have seen that tells you that a company is genuinely ready to move to the next stage in this adventure? Ramon, maybe I'll throw that to you first.
It's the way when I get a phone call and they know, they're not beating around the bush to say, okay, I'm missing out on this business. I want it. I'm ready to invest. Or I've got investors that are backing me. What do I need to do? Then you know they're serious. They want to get into it. They're missing opportunity because they're not this or that, or they think they're missing opportunity. And they're really keen on pursuing those opportunities. At that point, I would say they're ready.
Okay, thank you. Trill?
I would say, so this is my own opinion. This is not a 123 cyber thing. This is Troll's opinion. There are not enough defense suppliers in Canada. Frankly, for the past several decades, again, my own opinion, the government has been very inconsistent of its support of the military, and I think that civilian industry has responded accordingly. Now I think the tide is turning. I think that there will be some supply chain disentanglement, and you can read into that what you will. And I think there will be some new pathways built east and west. So I think, again, I'll go back. There's huge opportunity here. So frankly, if you're on this call, you're probably ready to start considering it and finding out how your products can fit into what Canada needs now and what we're going to need in the future. And there's folks here to help you. And there's smart ways to go about this, that you can do this efficiently and actually improve your business and how you're actually running things.
Thank you. MC?
Could resume that in one sentence. I would say that they stop reacting to requirements and they start anticipating them. So like the panic mode feel like it's gone and they're just ready and they ask questions and they put forward the right processes. So yeah, so they stop reacting to requirements because they keep on coming. Trust me. They don't stop. And there's always something new. It's a yeah, never ending world.
Yeah, we will not be bored as we dive into this. In terms of NGen, we've had many questions from people saying, is this the buzzword of the day? How long is defense going to be here in Canada? We're here to tell you it's staying. It's important. Stuart stressed in our last webinar, it will be here for decades. This isn't a rush. So evaluate your company, see what your gaps are, and create your roadmap, create your pathway. And I do want to encourage you as well. I ask for questions in the comment box, but if there are things that are hindering you as well, let us know. Any insights you can provide us as well will help us to inform how to help you in the future. Okay, so I do want to go. I mentioned, thank you, first of all, thank you so much to everyone who's joined us today. See, your presentation was a fantastic overview of the compliance journey for companies. Raymond Haru and Troll, thank you so much for your expertise. I wish we could talk to you for much, much, much longer. So hopefully we'll get an opportunity to do more with you in the future. But currently we do have some opportunities that I'd like to share with everyone on the call. So hold on while I pull up our slides. Okay, so upcoming with NGen, we have a couple more webinars in our Defense Readiness series. On March 12th, we'll be digging into cybersecurity and compliance. Cybersecurity more from a tactical implementation perspective than from the overall compliance perspective. So that should be a really interesting session. I'm jumping to the bottom of the slide. At the end of April, we're taking companies once again to Hannover Messe in Hanover, Germany. This is the world's largest industrial trade show. Last year, we brought 600 companies with us, and we helped to represent Canada as the co-host country with Germany. So that momentum will continue. And this year, there will be defense content. There will be companies sharing process efficiencies and technology around manufacturing that will be definitely relevant to defense. So if you're in the sector or interested, you should think about coming and joining us. Before that, we'll be having our 4th Defense Readiness webinar, April 9th, looking at how to go and actually really take advantage of that opportunity internationally, create connections, and know how to go in really effectively related to this sector. March 31st and April 1st, NGen will be doing what we have been doing in Germany, bringing here to Canada the leaders in the manufacturing sector so that we can get together, talk, have discussions, talk about strategy going forward. And specifically, there we go. Specifically, we're putting together 1 day of defense content for you. I'm showing here an excellent panel that's going to help to talk about the strategy for defense in Canada, the industrial pivot, and how to build a company that's resilient and successful as we move forward into the future. So that's happening. We also have a high-level government keynote speaker that I am not able to announce to you today, but absolutely, this is where you want to be if you're in the sector and if you're looking to communicate with everyone else working there in Canada. With that, thank you again, everyone. I want to pass the podium back to Stuart Kramer.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. So just wanted to thank you all for attending. This is a vast topic, and you don't have to get it all at once, as our panelists have shared. It's a journey, but it's an opportunity too. So what we'd ask you to do is send us your questions. If there are things we didn't cover that you would like us to cover in a future webinar, please write us and let us know. We are trying to build content based on the needs of the attendees. And we hope you'll join us for our next webinar where we dig in a little bit deeper on cybersecurity. on March 12th. So with that, thank you all. And thank you, Christy, MC, Raymond, and Jonathan, for your insights and all of the information you've shared. We will collect answers to all the questions and we will share them back to everyone with the webinar programming. And with that, we wish you all a good day and hope you'll join us again next month.